Chapter 651. Fortunately, Tang Axayan still wanted to flatter her and kept asking if her aunt was sick. It made Lin Yun very uncomfortable. Although Zhao Yi was almost 40 years old, he only had sex once every 20 years, so he could not help but be greedy. That night, he ignored Lin Yun's objections and dragged her away. Grandpa Lin sat at the dining table and looked around, not saying a word. Grandpa Lin sighed in his heart. She had found a companion, and he was the only one left. Fortunately, Tang Axayan could still relieve his boredom. If it was not for Tang Yu's insistence to take Tang Axayan away, he really hoped that the little girl would stay to accompany his old bones. When Tang Axayan left, she went to look for Lin Jinrong. He was sitting in the study, reading a book, a quiet and handsome man. Tang Axayan walked over and touched him with her fair little finger. "Hey!" Lin Jinrong looked up and quietly looked at Tang Axayan. "Didn't you say you were leaving?" Perhaps he was too direct and hurt Tang Axayan's little heart. She pouted. "The car is at the door." She was here to say goodbye to him. Lin Jinrong replied with an "oh," and looked down at the book in his hand coldly. Tang Axayan pursed her lips and said slowly, "I saw the present you gave to Chi-Chi. Can you make one for me?" Lin Jinrong's fingers that were flipping through the book stopped. His eyes fell on something for a long time before he said, "When you get married, I'll give it to you." Get married? She might not be able to wait for it. And he said this to reject her, right? For a 17-year-old girl to have feelings for a boy, this kind of expression was already very clear. But he rejected her. Tang Axayan was a little dejected. She replied with an "oh" and slowly walked out. Lin Jinrong stopped her. "Wait." Tang Axayan suddenly turned around and looked at him with her bright eyes. Lin Jinrong slowly pushed the wheelchair closer and handed over the book in his hand. He said lightly, "This is a book that I like recently. It's for you. Just take it as a souvenir." Tang Axayan looked at him eagerly and did not say anything for a long time. Lin Jinrong placed the book in his hand into her pure white palm and smiled. "Some liking means a lifetime. You're still young, so you don't understand." Tang Axayan looked at the book. It was an original book, and it seemed like he had been reading it for quite some time. After a long time, she let out a soft hum and didn't say anything else. He must still like Chi-Chi. Tang Axayan sniffed and suddenly felt sorry for Lin Jinrong. She clearly liked Chi-Chi, but she still wanted to see her brother and Chi-Chi together. She wanted to ask more, but Lin Jinrong interrupted her. "You don't need to pity me." Tang Axayan was stunned. How naive of her. She looked at his face. At this time, he had already regained his calmness. He didn't care about her anymore and pushed the wheelchair back to the original place. The dim light outlined his handsome lines, giving him a kind of melancholic beauty. Tang Axayan was a little dazed. She stared at him for a long time before she left. After she left, Lin Jinrong looked up. He looked at the direction of the door for a while, then he smiled and continued to read. Tang Axayan got into the car and sat beside Pei Chi-Chi gloomily. She was dejected. Tang Yu turned to look at her and saw the book in her hand. He started the car and asked casually, "You went to see Jinrong?" Tang Axayan looked up and asked, "Brother, how did you know?" Chapter 652. Tang Axayan pursed her lips and her face turned red. Could it be that big brother? Could it be that he had guessed her thoughts? However, as her brother, he still gave her some face and didn't say anything else. Pei Chi-Chi didn't say anything, but it didn't mean that she didn't know. She was a little surprised. Tang Axayan and Jinrong. Tang Axayan had only seen Jinrong once or twice, and Jinrong was still in a wheelchair. How could she, moreover, Jinrong was quite cold, and Meng Qingqing had always been good to Tang Xian and always tried to make her happy. However, Tang Xian had always treated Meng Qingqing as her brother, and she didn't see him like this. Pei Chi pursed her lips and looked at Tang Yu in the rearview mirror. As soon as they returned to the rose garden, Meng Qingqing came over. Tang Xian fell asleep in the car. Tang Yu wanted to carry her out of the car, but Meng Qingqing took the initiative to carry her for him. Tang Yu smiled and didn't stop her. He picked up the book that Tang Xian dropped and put it in Meng Qingqing's arm. This is Tang Xian's. As he said that, he took Chi-Chi's things out of the car and carried them upstairs. They were all gifts from the elders of the Lin family. There were many valuable things for her to play with. Pei Chi looked at Meng Qingqing's back view, then turned her head and said worriedly, Tang Yu, look at Qingqing. Tang Yu smiled. Don't worry. Qingqing is not a child, and Tang Xian is very young. There's enough time for him to think it through. Pei Chi said, oh, and didn't say anything else. In the bedroom, Tang Yu put the things away and was about to straighten up when a pair of small hands hugged him from behind. What's wrong, Mrs. Tang? He patted her little hand. I need to pack my things. Although she had only stayed at the Lin mansion for 2 days, a pregnant woman really had a lot of things. Pei Chi hugged him and pressed her face against his back. She asked softly, you said that Tang Xian has feelings for Jinrong. Is it true? It's just a child's imagination. Tang Yu smiled and pulled her into his arms. His hands and feet bound her, and his gaze was deep. Pei Chi, are you feeling a little uncomfortable? Do you think that He whispered into her ear, your first love is going to be snatched away by Tang Xian. Pei Chi was like a little doll in his arms. She pouted and said, I didn't. All right. His voice was hoarse. Then say something nice. He bit her little ear and lectured her naughtily. Pei Chi-Chi's little face was completely red. She bit her lip and looked at him pitifully. After a while, she buried her little face in his arms and told him everything. Tang Yu's blood was boiling as he listened. He kissed her and said, all right, go and play. She ran to the door, turned around and stuck her tongue out at him. Tang Yu smiled and continued to tidy up her things, just like an old maid. He valued privacy more. In the past, these things were done by Chi-Chi, but since she was pregnant, he had to do it. While he was packing, he couldn't help but smile. Sometimes he would look at what she was doing. In fact, they didn't have to do anything. Just being together was enough. After a while, Pei Chi came to make trouble again. She clung to him from behind and hugged his waist with her little hands. Her voice was also warm. Tang Yu, are you done? He turned his head to look at her and looked a little embarrassed. After a while, he said, well, Pei Chi, I'm thinking about where to put the things that Jinrong gave you. Pei Chi covered her face and ran away quickly. Chapter 653. The awards ceremony in B City was held in a 6-star hotel under the municipal government. It was extremely luxurious and classy. Naturally, the higher-ups would not pay for it. They had no choice but to sponsor it. The Rising Star Award was a very important award. At least the winners had a certain level of credibility in the industry. Of course, Pei Chi-Chi's credibility was more reflected in her being Tang Yu's wife and the wife of the CEO of Xingyuan Group. At the dinner party, all the important figures in politics and business were present. Of course, Tang Yu would be there too. When she heard that he was going to give an award to a beautiful businesswoman tonight, Pei Chi argued with him at home for a while. At 4 p.m, the styling studio came over to style her. Naturally, Tang Yu would not let her wear a gown that had been worn by others. He ordered a haute couture gown. The top was embroidered with smoke-colored gauze, and the bottom was a cake-cut denim skirt. It was simple and lively. Most importantly, it was comfortable. As for the shoes, she chose a pair of medium heels. Fortunately, her legs were long and slender, so it was not bad. The stylist tied her hair up high. Her face was covered with a layer of honey powder, and her lips were the color of jelly. She looked unbelievably young. She did not look like a mother at all, but a little girl. After changing, Tang Yu came over and looked at her deeply. Then, he leaned over and kissed her. His voice was a little hoarse. Very beautiful. Mr. Tang has good taste. She praised him. Tang Yu raised his eyebrows. Are you talking about choosing the person or the dress? Pei Chi hugged his arm. Both. He chuckled and reached out to pinch her little nose. You little shameless girl. They took the same car there, but when they arrived at the party, they sat separately. Tang Yu was the senior host. He was in the middle of the first row, so his status was naturally high. As for Pei Chi, the small Pei group, she was in the 18th row. Pei Chi and Tang Yu were about 10 rows apart. When Tang Yu saw the seats, he frowned and wanted to ask someone to arrange a seat for her. However, Pei Chi refused. She felt that it wasn't good to be treated like that. Only then did Tang Yu give up. After he sat down, Shin Chongshan happened to be next to him. He nodded slightly. Uncle Shin. Shin Chongshan smiled. Didn't Tang Yu come with Boss Pei? Where is little Boss Pei? Tang Yu turned his head and looked in Pei Chi's direction. Then he smiled and said, behind us. Shin Chongshan also looked over and sat down with them. I heard that when you guys walked the red carpet just now, it shocked the media. This was the first time Tang Yu and his wife were together after their marriage, so all the media wanted to get first-hand news. Tang Yu and Pei Chi were also very cooperative and killed a lot of film. Hearing Shin Chongshan's words, Tang Yu smiled faintly. Uncle Shin must be joking. Chi is a good seedling. It's a pity that she's at home, Shin Chongshan suddenly said. Tang Yu was stunned, but it only lasted for a moment before he returned to normal. It depends on Chi. He didn't really want his wife to be a strong woman. However, if Chi liked to work, he wouldn't object. Of course, he would protect his woman. Shin Chongshan didn't say anything else. The host just happened to be on stage. She was very young and beautiful. She was also quite experienced and very popular. The awards were presented one after another. When Tang Yu presented the award to the young beauty, the beauty asked for a hug. Chapter 654. The beauty was a little uncomfortable. The MC was good at reading people's expressions. He sneered inside. Was this woman crazy? Didn't she know that Tang Yu loved his wife as much as his own life? How could he ask for a hug in front of another man's wife? His IQ was obviously not online. How did he manage to grow his business? However, the MC was still smiling. Mr. Tang is a bit henpecked. At this time, most men would deny it and say that they were respecting their wives. But Tang Yu didn't. He looked at Pei Chi and smiled. Then he said with some distress, Mrs. Tang is a little hard to please. That was a lot of information. The MC's mouth twitched. Then he signaled for the lights to shine on Pei Chi. He coughed and said, Mrs. Tang, do you allow Mr. Tang to hug someone out of courtesy? He was deliberately making things difficult for her. He wanted to see Pei Chi's ability to react on the spot. Moreover, this was a live broadcast. Pei Chi took the microphone and tilted her head. Tang Yu, what should I say? Her voice was a little soft, and there was no sense of distance at all. Moreover, when she talked to Tang Yu, she fully displayed the obedience of a little wife. Tang Yu was henpecked. So, there was basically no trace of it. Tang Yu looked at her from the stage and smiled. Chi-Chi, you can say whatever you want. Oh. Pei Chi-Chi replied softly. Of course I don't want it to be. She was showing off their affection. Actually, she didn't want to embarrass the MC, but it was obvious that he wanted to embarrass her. Moreover, a young woman wanted to hug a man of her age in front of his wife. Pei Chi-Chi wasn't stupid. She knew that it could be interpreted as a provocation. And she had always hated provocations. Tang Yu expressed his appreciation for her answer. The MC looked a little uncomfortable. He had wanted to liven things up, but he didn't expect that neither Tang Yu nor Pei Chi-Chi would cooperate. Finally, it was Pei Chi-Chi's turn to receive the award. Unfortunately, it was Shin Zhongshan who was going to present the award to her. When Shin Zhongshan mentioned her name, Pei Chi-Chi stood up and was about to walk onto the stage. Tang Yu suddenly walked over and held her arm. He smiled at her and said, "Let me help you up." Pei Chi-Chi glanced at him and didn't say anything in the end. She followed him up the stage. Tang Yu walked to the side once he reached the stage. Shin Zhongshan handed the crystal trophy to Pei Chi-Chi and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Congratulations, Boss Pei." He looked at her smiling face, which was as lively as an expensive oil painting, and felt a little dazed for a moment. This was his daughter, but he could only call her Boss Pei. Even if he called her Chi-Chi, it still seemed a little abrupt. After Shin Zhongshan gave out the award, he felt a sense of loss in his heart. For a moment, he sighed and hugged Pei Chi-Chi. The crowd was in an uproar. Boss Pei had double standards. However, no one dared to say anything. They didn't even dare to look at Mr. Tang's black face. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and was a little surprised. However, he was still an elder. Although it was a little stiff, she still didn't push Shin Zhongshan away. It was really, fucking doggy. Shin Zhongshan was Shin Lian's father. Hugging her, Pei Chi-Chi, was as unbelievable as the moon hitting the earth. Shin Zhongshan only hugged her lightly and then let go. After that, he stood side by side with Pei Chi-Chi and accepted the media's photos. At that moment, he was more or less proud in his heart. This was Shin Zhongshan's daughter. Any father would like his daughter who was capable and beautiful. Chapter 655. Shin Zhongshan felt a little emotional. He patted Pei Chi-Chi and said, "Congratulations, Chi-Chi." There was a touch of tenderness and love in his eyes. It almost flashed to Pei Chi-Chi. Before she could think about it, she was asked to leave the stage. Tang Yu supported her. He did not send her back to where she came from. Instead, he arranged for her to sit next to him. So, Pei Chi-Chi and Shin Zhongshan sat together again. Pei Chi-Chi and Tang Yu talked in low voices. Shin Zhongshan would occasionally look at her. He had never had such a chance to sit so close to her. Maybe, this was the only chance. However, the more loving his eyes were, the angrier Shin Lian was in front of the TV. He still had Pei Chi-Chi in his heart. Many years ago, he betrayed her mother and was with Zhao Ku. Many years later, he betrayed her and cared about Pei Chi-Chi. Was he going to hand over the company to Pei Chi-Chi and save Tang Xan after that? No, she would never let him do that. With her, there would be no Pei Chi-Chi. The Shin family only had one daughter, Shin Lian. Shin Lian looked up and there was a touch of coldness in her eyes. When Shin Zhongshan came back, it was already late at night. He closed the door and heard a cold voice coming from the sofa. "Dad, did you have a good time tonight?" Shin Zhongshan walked over slowly and looked at Shin Lian who was sitting on the sofa. He frowned. Shen Lian, why are you wearing so little? Shen Lian chuckled softly. It was a little strange. You still care about me? Shen Zhongshan frowned. He sat down and faced Shen Lian. What's wrong? Who made you angry this time? Because of Tang Yu's marriage, especially Pei Qiqi's pregnancy, Shen Lian had suffered a huge blow. During this period of time, she had been acting weird. Shen Chongshan and Mrs. Shen were used to it, so they gave in to her. Shen Lian pursed her lips and looked up. Her long curly hair covered half of her face as she stared at Shen Zhongshan. Dad, when are you going to bring Pei Qiqi back to acknowledge her ancestors? The muscles on Shen Zhongshan's face kept twitching and finally became stiff. What are you talking about? Isn't it? Shen Lian's tone was full of sarcasm. You were such a loving father at the award ceremony today. Dad, now that Pei Qiqi is married to Tang Yu, won't you fulfill your ambition if you acknowledge her? Shen Chongshan's voice was restrained as he stared at Shen Lian. Be careful, your mother is still at home. Shen Lian suddenly threw a table on the coffee table at the opposite wall. With a bang, it broke into pieces. Are you still worried about her? If you were worried about her, you wouldn't have slept with other women, and you wouldn't have gotten pregnant with a bastard. Now, you're fighting with me for the Shen family's assets. Shen Lian stood up in anger. No one had ever dared to speak to Shen Zhongshan like this. Moreover, it was his daughter who he regarded as the apple of his eye. His face was a little pale. Shen Lian, take back what you said just now. I can pretend that nothing happened. Just like what you did to Mom, right? Shen Lian sneered. You want to keep the peace and continue to pretend to be a loving couple in front of others. The more she spoke, the more agitated she became. Dad, I feel ashamed for you. As soon as she finished speaking, she received a heavy slap on the face. With a loud smack, Shen Lian's face was tilted to the side. She was stunned. Ever since she was young, Shen Zhongshan had never been willing to hit her. Chapter 656. Shen Lian turned around and looked at Shen Zhongshan in disbelief. There was still anger on her face. It stung. That slap felt as if Pei Qiqi had personally slapped her face. She had never been humiliated like this before. Shen Zhongshan's sharp eyes looked old. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but he swallowed it back. Dad, you hit me. Shen Lian covered her face and said softly, I want to tell Mom what you have done all these years. Tell Mom that you have given Zhao Ku 2 children. In her eyes, there was a determination to fight to the death. Shen Chongshan had never thought that he would raise such a reckless daughter. She kept saying that it was for her mother, but he knew that it was for himself. For the Shen family's company, and for Tang Yu. Shen Zhongshan was about to lose his temper, but his face suddenly turned purple and then pale. He wanted to say something, but his heart was in pain, and he could not say anything. He took out a bottle of Quick Heart pills from his pocket with trembling hands, but he could not open it for a long time. His body tilted and slowly slid down, and the medicine rolled on the side. Shen Zhongshan had a myocardial infarction. If he did not take the medicine, he might die. Shen Lian knew that her whole body was trembling as she stood there. But she did not move. She just watched her father crawling on the ground, desperately trying to reach the bottle of medicine. Would he die if he did not take the medicine? Then, no one would stop her, and she would be the only heir of the Shen family. Mom would not blame her, because Shen Zhongshan had betrayed her. Shen Lian smiled, with tears in her eyes. Yes, she was not wrong. She did not want to kill him, she just did not give him the medicine. Shen Zhongshan crawled on the ground, desperately trying to reach the bottle, but he could not reach it. He lay on the ground, panting, and his voice was getting weaker and weaker. Mrs. Shen stood at the top of the stairs, screamed, and rushed over. She squatted down and held Shen Zhongshan with one hand. She opened the bottle with the other hand and fed him a pill. After a while, the medicine took effect, and Shen Zhongshan slowly recovered. Chongshan, how are you? Mrs. Shen patted his face and felt relieved. Shen Chongshan opened his eyes and met Shen Lian's gaze. Shen Lian felt guilty. She shivered and pursed her beautiful lips tightly. After a long time, Shen Zhongshan slowly said, "I'm fine." Mrs. Shen helped him to sit on the sofa. Then she frowned and looked at Shen Lian, who was still standing opposite her. "What's wrong with you? Your father couldn't get the medicine. Why didn't you get it for him? This illness can kill him." Shen Lian's face was extremely pale, and so were her lips. They were almost the same color as her face. For a long time, she could not say a word. Shen Zhongshan waved his hand and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't blame the child." She was scared. Mrs. Shen was still a little dissatisfied and scolded Shen Lian a few more times. Shen Zhongshan signaled her to stop talking. Shen Lian apologized and said that she was scared. When she left, Shen Zhongshan looked at her back with an unfathomable look. This child, just now, was prepared to watch him die. Should he make other plans? Shen Zhongshan didn't listen to Mrs. Shen and went to rest. Instead, he went to the study. Chapter 657. Shen Lian went out after Shen Zhongshan and Mrs. Shen went upstairs. Late at night, she sat alone in the car and leaned against the steering wheel for a long time. Her body was trembling. Tonight, she had almost watched her father die. But she was also disappointed in him. He had disappointed her again and again. Shen Lian raised her head and flipped her hair. She picked up the phone and dialed Qin Anlin's number. "Anlin, yi say bar. If you don't show up, I'll sleep with the first man who buys me a drink." Her voice was flat, as if she was talking about something that had nothing to do with her. Qin Anlin cursed under his breath, while Shen Lian laughed. An hour later, yi say bar. Qin Anlin found Shen Lian in the middle of a group of men. She was lying there, slightly drunk. Her long curly hair was scattered over her shoulders, blocking a trace of spring on her shoulders. He only needed to stand there and have a strong aura, and those men who wanted to take advantage of him would automatically make way for him. Qin Anlin walked over and pulled Shen Lian's slender arm. He gritted his teeth and asked, "What's wrong with you now?" Shen Lian lost her balance and fell into his arms. She did not move for a long time and just lay in his arms obediently. After a long time, she called out seductively like a kitten, "Qin Anlin, you won't leave me alone, will you?" Qin Anlin's face was slightly raised, and there was a suppressed expression on his face. "I just don't want to see you in the headlines tomorrow." She already had things that others could not imagine. So many things. Was Tang Yu really that important? Shen Lian leaned on his shoulder, and her little finger gently stroked the back of his shirt. "Qin Anlin, we are the same now. We can't get what we want, and we are equally pitiful." She smiled charmingly. "Anlin, Pei Chi-Chi is pregnant with Tang Yu's child." She moved her lips to his ear and whispered, "Think about it, what position did they use to make love in order to have this child? Do you think Tang Yu is at the top or the back?" Qin Anlin's body was a little tense, so was his face. Shen Lian's fingers moved down boldly and touched something solid. "Did you wake up here because of me or because you thought of Pei Chi-Chi?" She bit his earlobe. "Anlin, I didn't expect you to be so innocent." As soon as she finished speaking, her body was held in place by Qin Anlin. His arm was like an iron clamp around her waist, not giving her a chance to struggle. Under the dim light, his eyes were faintly burning, and his voice was unbelievably hoarse. "Shenlian, what do you want?" She was a little hurt by him, but she still giggled and leaned on his shoulder. "Anlin, do you dare to want me?" "I don't believe you. You're attracted to Pei Chi-Chi, that little holy maiden. Do you think you can be more stubborn when it comes to other women?" Qin Anlin's eyes blazed like flames, filled with anger. His arm tightened, and he dragged the person in his arms to a darker corner. With a spin, Shenlian's body hit the wall behind her. It hurt. Then, her arms were raised high, and her body was pressed against him forcefully. It was clearly painful, but Shenlian was very excited. She raised her little face, showing off her beautiful neck and sexy collarbone. She looked at him. "Do you dare to want me here?" Qin Anlin moved closer. "You're playing with fire." He leaned forward. "Shenlian, this is not a game you can play." Chapter 658. Qin Anlin looked at her for a long time. He gave her time to regret, to resist, to struggle, and to leave. However, Shenlian seemed particularly manic. She was twisting her body, inviting him to do it. Half of it was anger, and the other half was desire. Qin Anlin was in the bar, in a dark corner, deeply, the humidity in the air seemed to have reached saturation, and there was the smell of sweat everywhere. There was also an indescribable aura. Qin Anlin leaned against the side of her neck, and his voice was bewildered. "Do you think I don't dare to?" Shenlian was so excited that she kept gasping. They had only done it once, and this was the second time. She bit his shoulder with all her might to stop herself from making strange sounds. After a while, she probably couldn't take it anymore. She looked up and said in a muffled voice, "Anlin." "Anlin." Qin Anlin's dark eyes looked at her intoxicated expression. His eyes were clear, and there was even a hint of coldness in the corner of his mouth. She did not call him by the wrong name when they made love. It was a pure venting, and it was their first time. It didn't take long, about 10 minutes in total. However, due to the stimulation of the environment, Shenlian still trembled uncontrollably. She hugged him, sobbed, and called him Tangyu. She moaned softly again and again, sounding like an obedient kitten. Qin Anlin calmed down for 10 seconds, and suddenly pushed her away. Shenlian was flustered, and her body slid down. Qin Anlin stood in front of her. His face was cold, and there was no trace of laziness after lust. He slowly cleaned himself with a tissue, threw it on the floor, and zipped it up. Shenlian was sweating all over, and she sat on the floor, looking at him. Her eyes were still filled with shock. "I'm not a substitute. And Shenlian, if you want a man, I can satisfy you, but it depends on my mood." Qin Anlin looked around. "If you don't want to be eaten alive by the men here, leave as soon as possible." As he spoke, he turned around and left without any reluctance. Shenlian was still sitting, her whole body cold. From this moment on, she really felt that Qin Anlin really didn't want her. In the past, she had always thought that he was only angry at her and that his interest in Pei Chi-Chi was only temporary. Now, he wanted her, but she was the same as the small models and celebrities in his company. On this day, Shenlian finally realized that the reason he didn't want her before wasn't because of love or pride, but because he really didn't love her anymore. She sat there in tears, and he did not look back. She called out hoarsely behind him, "Qin Anlin." He paused and looked back. Shenlian sat there and cried. She said to him heartbreakingly, "Let's be together, Qin Anlin, okay?" He stood in a place where there was some light, and he slowly took out a cigarette and smoked it. After a long time, he said mildly, "Shenlian, I don't make do, especially with women. A woman who didn't love him, would continue to play games with life. He didn't look at her and left. Shenlian covered her face with her hands and cried in embarrassment. She had lost completely. She actually wanted to ask him if he would have softened his heart and been with her if Pei Chi didn't exist and she had lowered herself to beg him like this, would he still be with her? But Shenlian didn't dare to ask him. After Qin Anlin went out, he didn't go back, but drove to the rose garden. Chapter 659. It was already late at night. Even though it was June, there was still a hint of moist coolness at night. Qin Anlin parked the car on the road about 100 meters away from the rose garden. He opened the car door and got out. He took a pack of cigarettes and leaned against the car door. He didn't know why he came here. Maybe it was because of what Shenlian said. He lit a cigarette quietly and thought of Pei Chi's pregnancy. What did pregnancy have to do with posture? His gaze was a little distant. If he still had some feelings for Shenlian before, then from today onwards, there was nothing left. He didn't feel anything, from his heart to his body. When he did it with her, it was really no different from those small celebrities. It was probably because Shenlian had been with many men. He could still remember the first time he and Shenlian had met, how shyly she opened her mouth and pressed her hot lips on his. He would never forget it for the rest of his life. However, she was no longer the Shenlian of the past. As early as the second day when she told him that he was just a tool for her to test Tang Yu, he knew that he and Shenlian would never be able to be together. Qin Anlin slowly smoked his cigarette. He stood alone in the darkness. It seemed like many years ago that he was sad because of a girl. It was very distant and a little ridiculous. However, he still did it. It wasn't that he couldn't control it, but he didn't want to control it. She was already married, but how could she still touch his heart? Moreover, how could she make him willingly, without any struggle, make her happy? This didn't seem like something that Qin Anlin would do. A ray of light slid across the sky. It was a meteor. Then, another ray of light, followed by another. The night was savagely cut open. The calm was destroyed. The sky was filled with dazzling light. Only then did Qin Anlin remember that there seemed to be a meteor shower tonight. He didn't have any intention of making a wish, because that was something that only a little girl would believe. He looked up and saw a pair of figures appearing on the second floor of the building. At that moment, Qin Anlin's body stiffened. Tang Yu and Pei Chi. All in white, standing on the balcony. He saw Pei Chi lying on the balcony with Tang Yu hugging her from behind. Although they were quite a distance apart, the scene was beautiful. Qin Anlin felt like he was torturing himself. He just watched as Tang Yu turned her body around. Watching them kiss. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, and he didn't know how to coordinate his facial muscles. He took a long drag on his cigarette, opened the car door, and exhaled deeply. He must have gone mad. The high-performance sports car sped away. In the distance, the meteor shower continued to streak past. However, Qin Anlin's heart was a sea of darkness. In the distance, Tang Yu kissed Pei Chi and slowly let go of her. His voice was a little hoarse. Chi, it's cold outside. Go back to the bedroom, be good. She curled up in his arms and was unusually disobedient. I want to watch a little longer. He looked at her disapprovingly, then carried her and walked towards the bedroom. Tang Yu, I want to watch a little longer, the little mother pleaded softly. She hugged his black head and clung to him like a little kitten. Tang Yu placed her on the edge of the bed and squatted down to look her in the eye. Chapter 660. The moment he mentioned the child, Pei Chi became obedient. She hugged his shoulders and said coquettishly, I made a wish just now, Tang Yu. He still maintained this posture, looking up at her and patting her little hand gently. What did our Chi-Chi wish for? She pouted and hugged his neck. I can't say it. It won't come true if I say it. Her expression was indescribably cheeky and happy. It was something he had seen often recently. Chi-Chi was really different from how she used to be. In the past, she was actually a little cold and didn't like to talk much. Now, she was a clingy person. But when she liked someone, no matter what she became, she would still like that person. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to rub her little head. Then pretend well. Tell Mr. Tang when it comes true. She said sweetly, okay. Tang Yu looked at her and suddenly asked her meaningfully, Chi-Chi, you said earlier that you still want to see the meteor shower, right? You really want me to see it? She hugged him. The weather forecast said that the meteor shower would last the entire night. Tang Yu's gaze was deep. He carried her horizontally and walked out of the bedroom. Going up a staircase to the rooftop, he reached out and pressed a button. A glass room of about 20 square meters magically appeared on the rooftop. There was a king-sized bed in it. There were black roses scattered on the bed and on the floor. It was a visual impact. Coupled with the meteor shower in the sky, everything was extremely beautiful. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. She bit her lips and after a long time, she turned her head and looked at him. Tang Yu, when did you prepare this? He smiled and carried her in. He placed her on the king-sized bed and hovered above her. One arm supported him and the other hand touched her lips. I prepared it when I knew there would be a meteor shower. Pei Chi-Chi hugged his arm and took the roses beside her. She looked up at the starry sky. Those meteors were falling in whole pieces. It was so beautiful that it seemed unreal. Her long hair was spread on the pillow, and her bathrobe had already come loose. Chi-Chi. His voice was a little hoarse as he kissed her lips. I want you to be happy. Chi-Chi, my wish is for you to be happy. Tang Yu lay down and pulled her little body into his arms. The two of them snuggled up together and watched the meteors streak across the sky. Just watching like this would make one believe that there was eternity in this world. It was late at night, and the glass house was warm. Pei Chi-Chi was lying on the bed. The surrounding white and black formed a strong contrast. Her little face was slightly raised. She felt the rose in Tang Yu's hand slowly moving down her neck. It was ice cold. She grabbed his arm with her small hand and said in a weak voice, Tang Yu. Her eyes were blindfolded, so she could not see and felt uneasy. Be good and feel it. Tang Yu kissed her ear to comfort her and continued, ever since she was pregnant, he had never wanted her. Tonight, he wanted her. The pure starry sky and the transparent glass house made her feel like she was in nature. She felt a little curious and shy. She slowly opened herself up. In the end, Pei Chi-Chi cried out because she was afraid. Her long eyelashes were trembling, and there were 2 drops of tears on them. It was very lovable. Tang Yu leaned over and kissed her, but she cried even harder. She hugged him with her little hands and refused to let him continue. Chapter 661. Tang Yu's heart was about to melt. He clearly wasn't satisfied. He could only touch her lightly, and now she wouldn't let him touch her. But there was an indescribable satisfaction in his heart. He kissed and rubbed her, not daring to touch her anymore. Abruptly, he stopped and gently soothed her. She finally stopped. Her eyelids were pink from crying, and she bit her lips, rosy and beautiful. She just looked at him, her eyes watery. You're all right. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her. His voice was warm. You're crying like this. How can I do it? Pei Chi-Chi didn't say anything. She just hugged him. He was still doing that. Just as Tang Yu was holding back, he heard the little fellow whisper into his ear, "I'm fine." With that, she buried her face in his shoulder, a little shy. Tang Yu was wild with joy. He kissed her little mouth for a long time before murmuring, "Don't cry anymore." Because he couldn't continue doing it if he did. Pei Chi bit his shoulder. A moment later, Tang Yu laughed in a low and hoarse voice. His Chi missed him too. That night was warm and romantic. He only dared to do it once. He hugged her and watched the meteor shower together. They spoke softly. In the middle of the night, Pei Chi fell asleep in his arms. Tang Yu smiled brightly. Of course, there was someone who lived a happier life than him. It was Xiao Yi. A week later, Xiao Yi announced his marriage with Lin Yun. He was an old-fashioned man. What should have happened with Lin Yun had already happened. Since it happened, he should take responsibility. Both of them weren't young anymore. It was time for them to get married. Old Master Lin didn't make things difficult for Xiao Yi. To be honest, with Xiao Yi's qualifications, he could find a beautiful girl in her early 20s. Why did he have to find his half-grown daughter? And it was because of feelings. He didn't mention any conditions. He just let Xiao Yi take her away and treat Lin Yun well. Xiao Yi insisted that the marriage should be carried out as soon as possible, his heart burning with impatience. Lin Yun wanted her family to have a meal together, but Xiao Yi didn't agree. "Yin Yun, I don't want to be extravagant, but I want to see you in a wedding dress." This was his little wish. He had seen her in a wedding dress. That time, it was for Tang Ziyuan. And this time, it was for him. Lin Yun looked at his expression. She understood him and naturally knew what he was thinking. In the end, he still listened to Xiao Yi. Grandpa Xing felt comforted as he watched them get along. One had to know that Lin Yun, this girl, was not someone who would easily retreat. Xiao Yi actually managed to settle her with just a few words and without any dispute. It seemed that this girl cared a lot about Xiao Yi in her heart. The wedding was set for a week later and Xiao Yi would be in charge. As for Lin Yun's wedding dress, Pei Chi accompanied her to look at it many times. Of course, she also brought Tang Axayan along with her sometimes. The black RV stopped at Yanhui and Tang Axayan hopped out of the car, bowed and said goodbye to Lin Yun. Lin Yun rolled down the car window. "Drive slowly." Tang Axayan felt that ever since Big Aunt was going to marry Uncle Zhao, she had become much more loving. She wasn't afraid of her anymore. She smiled and waved. Just as she was about to go in, she turned around and saw Tang Ziyuan standing at the entrance of the villa. "Dad." Tang Axayan's voice was soft and there was some uneasiness in it. Chapter 662. Tang Axayan turned her head to look at Lin Yun, smiled embarrassedly, and walked away with a squeak. Lin Yun sat in the car, feeling regret. She shouldn't have shown up. But she couldn't hide anymore. Tang Ziyuan must have found out about her marriage with Xiao Yi. Tang Ziyuan walked over slowly and said in a deep voice, "You won't even give me 10 minutes to talk, will you?" Chi is in the car too. "I'll talk there," Lin Yun said lightly and opened the car door. At this time, Tang Ziyuan saw Pei Chi in the back seat. Pei Chi was a little uncomfortable and called out, "Dad." Tang Ziyuan nodded. Lin Yun walked a few meters away from him and the two stood there. Tang Ziyuan didn't say anything. In such silence, Lin Yun sighed softly, "Ziyuan, you know, don't you?" Tang Ziyuan pursed his lips, "About you and Zhao Yi getting married." Lin Yun didn't answer. Tang Ziyuan was a little annoyed. He took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it and took a puff. Then, he looked at her through the smoke. "Have you slept with him?" Lin Yun looked at him deeply and didn't answer directly. She just smiled faintly. Ziyuan, what's the point of asking this? The number of women he had slept with, including small stars and models, was enough to fill a row. Tang Ziyuan lowered his head and smiled bitterly. Yes, there's no point. He looked up at the woman he had been with for 10 years when he was young. To be honest, he had lived with Zhao Ke for a long time, but he didn't have any memories. All he remembered was the time he spent with Lin Yun. At that time, he must have been crazy to sleep with a woman like Zhao Ke and divorce Lin Yun. Tang Ziyuan's heart was full of desolation and his voice was hoarse. Lin Yun, if I say that the woman I love the most in my life is you, and I still love you, will you believe me? Lin Yun nodded slightly. I believe you. Her words probably gave Tang Ziyuan hope. He looked at Lin Yun fervently and said, Yun Yun, that model's child has been aborted. If you want, we can start all over again. I don't care about your Xiao Yi. Lin Yun found it ridiculous. She looked at Tang Ziyuan and said, that model. Tang Ziyuan, you don't even remember her name, yet you got her pregnant. And what do you mean you don't care? But I do. Why should I, Lin Yun, want a man who has been with countless women? Tang Ziyuan was stunned, and the cigarette in his hand froze. After a long time, he smiled bitterly. I knew this would be the result. However, he didn't want to give up. He wanted to try one last time. In the end, she still didn't want him. Tang Ziyuan raised his eyes and looked at her quietly. This was originally his wife. How could he bear to give up such a quiet and beautiful woman? There was a hint of warmth in Tang Ziyuan's eyes. His voice was low and hoarse. Yun Yun, then, I wish you happiness. With that, Tang Ziyuan turned and walked away. As he turned, Lin Yun noticed a tear in the corner of his eye. Lin Yun was stunned. However, she couldn't say anything. She could only sigh. After getting back into the car, Pei Chichi looked at Lin Yun carefully, not daring to say anything. It was better for her not to say anything about her father-in-law and mother-in-law. Lin Yun's eyes were a little red. Seeing Tang Ziyuan like this made her feel bad. Chapter 663. As the car drove further and further away, Pei Chichi quietly handed a piece of tissue to Lin Yun. Mom, I won't laugh. Lin Yun took it and wiped her face. Pei Chichi, you're such a bad girl. Pei Chichi smiled and nestled her face on her shoulder. Mom, it's all in the past. You have Uncle Zhao now. Lin Yun didn't say anything. Pei Chichi didn't know that in her heart, there was always a place that belonged to the young Tang Ziyuan. That was a place that no one could cross. A few days later, Zhao Yi and Lin Yun's wedding was held as scheduled. All the people present were relatives of the two families. Zhao Yi's mother attended the wedding and hugged Lin Yun. Zhao Yi's mother didn't expect that her son would get married one day. But when she saw Lin Yun, she understood why her son hadn't married all these years. Zhao Yi's wallet was filled with Lin Yun's care. It had been, for more than 20 years. What was rare was that Lin Yun looked surprisingly young. Although she didn't look like a girl in her 20s, she looked at most 37 or 38. Standing next to her son, they really looked like a good match. After the ceremony, Zhao Yi kissed his wife deeply. This happiness was exchanged for more than 20 years of persistence. Pei Chichi looked at him and her little face leaned against Tang Yu's shoulder. She sighed and said, Tang Yu, you have another papa now. Tang Yu looked at the little person in his arms and pinched her little face. Pei Chichi, you didn't get punished enough that night, did you? She giggled and fell on his shoulder. She hugged him with her little hands. Don't do that again. Tang Yu didn't scare her anymore. He reached out and hugged her slightly bulging waist. Although it had only been 2 months, it was already a little bulging. These days, Pei Chi always looked at herself in the mirror and complained that her body wasn't perfect enough. Mr. Tang just looked at her and didn't say anything. At this moment, when he touched her waist like this, she thought of that night again. Just thinking about it made her tremble a little. Tang Yu sincerely felt that it would be a different feeling to do it after she was pregnant. He smiled faintly, which was already the pinnacle of elegance. Pei Chi knew what he was thinking. She nestled on his shoulder and whispered, "Baby, look, our papa is so handsome." "Oh. Pei Chi, am I so handsome that you want to have me?" His voice was also very low. Pei Chi looked around and felt that she couldn't face the world anymore. He was really shameless. There were so many people here. Tang Yu chuckled hoarsely. "You're already a mother, yet you're still so shy." "I'm not small." Pei Chi was cursing Chihuahua in her heart. What aloofness. What abstinence. It was all fake. He was a big bad wolf through and through. No, it was a wolf with color. However, she still felt very blessed. She tilted her head and looked at Lin Yun and Zhao Yi exchanging rings. Suddenly, she had a feeling. She and Tang Yu were like an old couple. Unexpectedly, the bridesmaid was Tang Axian. As for the best man, Meng Qingqing shamelessly recommended himself. Tang Axian frowned for a long time. He said he was old. The 27-year-old Meng Qingqing felt very sad. He was not even 30 yet. How could he be old? She was too young. Of course, Tang Axian also saw Lin Jinrong. He was wearing a pair of jeans with a beige shirt. He looked a little fatter. Chapter 664. Tang Axian was wearing a bridesmaid's gown. She looked at them fervently, but Lin Jinrong remained indifferent. After a while, his gaze landed on Pei Chi. Tang Axian's eyes were a little hot. She knew that he couldn't forget Chi. She was overthinking things. She was still young, and her feelings for him were vague. They came and went quickly, but she didn't know how to hide them. Meng Qingqing was also known as a killer in the field of love. He had been with many women before. He could tell from Tang Axian's gaze that she was interested in Lin Jinrong. At that moment, Meng Qingqing's heart was in pain. He had been by her side for a few years, watching her grow up from a little girl. He didn't even dare to say that he liked her. But she actually liked Jinrong. He was just a young boy, and she fell in love with him after just a few glances. So, that night, when someone was asking for a bridesmaid and groomsman, Tang Axian giggled and said that Meng Qingqing was her uncle. In the end, Meng Qingqing, who had drunk a little, hugged her waist and kissed her under Tang Axian's shocked gaze. Tang Axian was stunned. Everyone was stunned. There were only about 10 people, and they were all close relatives of the Tang and Lin families. They all knew that Meng Qingqing was Tang Yu's good friend, and Tang Axian was his precious little sister. Not to mention that Meng Qingqing was more than 1 year older than Tang Axian. Tang Axian wasn't even of age. Was it appropriate to kiss like this? Tang Axian was stunned. Her lips were bright red. She felt a numbness in her mouth, an indescribable feeling. She didn't hate it, but, to be honest, she didn't feel too much. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked at Meng Qingqing. She opened her mouth and said in a crisp voice, "Brother Qingqing." Meng Qingqing had mustered up his courage just now. Now that the kiss was over, he sobered up. He gulped, looked around, and looked at his buddy for confirmation. Did he really kiss Tang Axian? His buddy replied, "Kissed, really kissed. You kissed Tang Yu's precious little sister. You're an old cow that eats young grass." Meng Qingqing was dumbfounded and did not come back to his senses for a long time. After a long time, he finally asked Tang Axan, Xin, I hope I didn't scare you when I was drunk. Don't take it seriously. I'm really drunk. As soon as he finished speaking, he received countless looks of disdain. Roll your balls. He had kissed her and liked her. What was the point of pretending to be pure and innocent? Just now, countless titanium dog eyes had seen it. When Qingqing was kissing her just now, he was so intoxicated. It was obvious that he was interested in Tang Axan, but now he was hiding his true feelings. Meng Qingqing shrugged. He didn't dare. He was afraid that if he confessed, Tang Axan would be scared, therefore, he asked eagerly and carefully looked at Tang Axan. Tang Axan frowned. Brother Qingqing, did you brush your teeth today? Meng Qingqing touched his nose. In fact, he really wanted to ask her if she felt anything just now. Upstairs, Tang Yu and Pei Chi were standing there. Tang Yu, I'm guessing that Qingqing saw through Tang Axan's feelings. That's why he lost control, Pei Chi said worriedly. Tang Yu's gaze was still on Meng Qingqing and Tang Axan. After a long time, he said calmly, it's just a small matter. Qingqing knows what he's doing. Pei Chi hesitated. In your heart, who do you want Tang Axan to be with? Chapter 665. Jinrong might always have Chi in his heart, while Qingqing had liked Tang Axan for so many years. From the bottom of his heart, he hoped that one day, Tang Axan and Qingqing could be together. Pei Chi didn't expect him to give such an answer. She thought that Meng Qingqing was a bit of a playboy outside, and Tang Yu didn't approve of it. Qingqing isn't what you see. Tang Yu didn't say anything else. Pei Chi didn't ask any more. Some things were better to be ignorant about, and it would be worse to say it out loud. However, what she didn't expect was that Tang Axan had a fever that night. She had already returned to Yanhui, but in the middle of the night, Yanhui's servant called and said that Tang Axan had a fever. However, Tang Ziyuan wasn't around. He probably went to get drunk. His phone couldn't be reached, so she had no choice but to call Tang Yu. After Tang Yu hung up the phone, he got up and got dressed. Pei Chi also sat up, still sleepy. What's wrong? Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her hair. His voice was hoarse. Tang Axan is sick. Dad isn't around. I'll take her to the hospital. I'll go too. Pei Chi lifted the blanket. Tang Yu pressed her hand and looked at her. Sleep well. You're pregnant. I'll call you when I get to the hospital. Pei Chi wanted to say something, but Tang Yu's voice was a little stern. Chi, be obedient. This isn't the time to be willful. She looked up and saw his expression. She slowly retracted her hand. He probably felt that his tone was too harsh, so he hugged her. It's okay. Stay at home and don't run around. She bit her lip and nodded. She looked at him and didn't leave. An hour later, she received a call from Tang Yu. Tang Axan had a cold and a fever today. However, because of her poor physique, she had to be hospitalized for a few days for observation. Tang Yu remembered that Tang Ziyuan had not been in the mood to care about her recently, so he thought that it was good for her to be hospitalized. Coincidentally, Qingqing was also in B City recently, so he could visit her from time to time. Meng Qingqing rushed over after a while. When he arrived, Tang Axan was already asleep. However, her face was abnormally red. Tang Yu got up and took his jacket. I just fell asleep. You keep watch. Meng Qingqing was expressionless. She had drunk herself into a coma, but when she found out that the young lady was sick, she immediately sobered up. Now that he had rushed over, just looking at it made his heart ache. This little guy had suffered so much since he was young. Sometimes, when he was not well, his arm would be full of needles, but the little guy could still smile sweetly at him. He was clearly in pain, but he kept smiling. Tonight, she called him Brother Ching. She hadn't called him that in a long time. He thought that she actually understood and was only pretending not to know that he liked her. Just because she liked Lin Jinrong, did that mean that Brother Ching couldn't like her? Tang Yu left, but he paused for a moment at the door. He turned back and looked at Meng Qingqing, saying seriously, "Qingqing, take good care of her." This seemingly ordinary sentence was actually a promise, a kind of attitude. Meng Qingqing's eyes almost turned red. This kind of promise was rare for Tang Yu. He smiled faintly. "I will." Tang Yu didn't say anything else and just walked out. When he walked outside, he unexpectedly bumped into someone. Shen Zhongshan. Tang Yu frowned slightly, looking a little tired, but he still went up to greet him. "Uncle Shen, why did you come to the hospital so late?" Chapter 666. Tang Yu looked behind him. "Why didn't Aunt Shen come with you?" "She fell asleep and I didn't wake her up." "Oh right, why are you here?" Shen Zhongshan asked casually. Tang Yu rubbed his brows. He lowered his head and did not see Shen Zhongshan's expression. When he looked up again, Tang Yu looked tired. "Tang Axian has a fever." Shen Zhongshan asked, "Is she feeling better now?" Tang Yu nodded. "Her fever has subsided a little, but we still need to observe her." "Qingqing is inside." Shen Zhongshan pointed downstairs. "I still need to get some medicine, you should go back early." He paused for a moment. "Chi-Chi is still waiting for you." Tang Yu nodded, said goodbye, and walked towards the elevator. Shen Zhongshan stood there for a while after Tang Yu left. He clenched his fists and looked depressed. Finally, he walked towards the elevator. When he reached Tang Xian's ward, he saw Meng Qingqing sitting by the bed through the glass. He bent down and kissed Tang Xian. Shen Zhongshan's eyebrows twitched. He could not help but shake hands. "Meng Qingqing, this bastard. How old is Tang Xian?" "She's only 17. And he kissed her just like that." If there was no one around, if Tang Xian was not sick, would Meng Qingqing swallow her whole? Although he was a derelict father, he still felt extremely uncomfortable when he saw this scene. Shen Zhongshan coughed lightly. Meng Qingqing, who was inside, was really shocked. When he straightened his body, Shen Zhongshan walked in. "Uncle Shen." Meng Qingqing was surprised. Shen Zhongshan nodded. "I bumped into Tang Yu outside. He said he has a heart disease, so I came to take a look." There was something strange in Meng Qingqing's eyes. She paused for a while and said, "Yes, maybe he was too crazy today. Or maybe he scared her." Shen Zhongshan's gaze fell on the little person on the bed. She was small, pale and lifeless. Dr. Yuan's words rang in his ears, "Zhongshan, you can match her body type, but your body doesn't allow you to." Dr. Yuan and he had been good friends for many years. He did not ask for more details, but from the information provided, he had already guessed it. In B City, what other illness could Shen Zhongshan be so concerned about? When he heard that, he was silent for a long time. Perhaps, Pei Chi-Chi's child could save Tang Xian. At this moment, looking at this small and pale little fellow, it was hard to imagine that she was his daughter. He had seen Tang Xian countless times. She always obediently called him Uncle Shen. She was pretty and obedient. He had always liked her. Privately, he also felt that she was not like Zhao Ku and was a good girl. But the thought that Tang Axian was his child had never crossed his mind. In fact, when Tang Axian was young, he had once carried her in his arms. What would have happened if he had known that it was his child? Meng Qingqing looked at Shen Zhongshan's expression and felt that he had gone overboard. You've shown concern, haven't you? Uncle Shen, it's okay. It's just a fever. You should be fine tomorrow. It's getting late, you should go home first. Meng Qingqing said with concern. But now, what Shen Zhongshan did not want the least was Meng Qingqing's concern, or even jealousy. What right did this kid have to kiss his daughter? Chapter 667. Shen Zhongshan looked at him meaningfully. He took out a list from his pocket and passed it to Meng Qingqing. Qingqing, help me get the medicine. Meng Qingqing opened the list and looked at it. He didn't say anything and walked out. When there was no one around, Shen Zhongshan sat on the bed and looked at Tang Axian. This child had suffered so much since she was born. It was his negligence. Shen Zhongshan reached out and covered Tang Axian with the blanket. His fingers didn't leave the bed immediately. Instead, he touched the pale little thing. His fingertips were hot. She was still having a fever. Tang Axian woke up in a daze. She looked at Shen Zhongshan in the dark. Daddy. She called out in a daze. She mistook him for Tang Ziyuan. That sound was like a kitten. It almost made Shen Zhongshan cry. She called him Daddy. Even though he knew he got the wrong person, he still felt an indescribable feeling in his heart. His eyes were a little warm. He couldn't express his emotions. Tang Axian opened her eyes and closed them again. Daddy, Tang Axian hurts. Every time she had a fever, her body would hurt. That kind of pain was very tiring. That kind of pain scared her. She was afraid that if she fell asleep, she would never wake up again. Shen Zhongshan's heart ached. He didn't know what to say. What a sin. If Xiao Ku was pregnant then, he would have taken good care of her. Would the child not have gotten this disease? But later, Shen Zhongshan found out that this was a hereditary disease in Xiao Ku's family. The incidence was high, but it was rare to have it since birth like Tang Axian. Shen Zhongshan treated Shen Lian like the apple of his eye. But he had never seen such a fragile little thing. Tang Axian was so weak, like a kitten. He reached out and stroked her little head. He comforted her gently. It will get better. Our little Tang Axian will get better. Tang Axian calmed down a little, probably because she felt the warmth. She closed her eyes and did not speak again. Her long eyelashes covered her pale face, making her look as fragile and adorable as a little angel who had fallen to the mortal world. Shen Zhongshan wanted to lean over and kiss her like Meng Qingqing, but he didn't dare. He was afraid that when Tang Axian woke up, she would look at him as if he was a strange uncle. In the end, he just gently stroked her little head, savoring the memory of her calling him Daddy. When Meng Qingqing came back, Shen Zhongshan looked at the little person on the bed one more time before he left. Outside the hospital, Shen Zhongshan took out another cigarette and slowly smoked it. He unlocked his phone and dialed Dr. Yuan's number. After a while, he said, Dr. Yuan, are you sure my body can't do it? No one knew what Dr. Yuan said, but Shen Zhongshan fell silent. He looked up at the sky and let out a long sigh. Originally, he had planned to donate his bone marrow to Tang Axian in secret, but his heart was not in good condition. Shen Zhongshan let out a long sigh and did not say anything else. He looked at the sky and felt that it was so dark that he almost couldn't breathe. When he reached the car, the driver opened the door for him and said carefully, Sir, Madam just called. Shen Zhongshan sat in the car and closed his eyes. Let's go. The driver drove away. Shin Zhongshan looked at his phone. It was his wife. She had called him 7 or 8 times, but he didn't hear it. Chapter 668. The Shin mansion servant replied, Furin did not find teacher and went to play cards. Shin Zhongshan nodded his head, got it. You all can leave. He slowly walked up to the corner of the second floor and bumped into Shin Lian. Shin Lian was shocked for a moment and took a few steps back. Under the light, her face was pale. Shin Zhongshan frowned, what's wrong? Shin Lian's long hair hung loosely over her shoulders and she looked delicate and weak. She looked at him and said softly, Father, nothing. I just can't sleep. Shin Zhongshan paused for a moment before continuing, sleep early. You still have to work tomorrow. He quietly walked past her and Shin Lian suddenly called out to him, Father, where did you go just now? I heard that you went to the hospital. My stomach is not feeling well. Shin Zhongshan lightly said and turned back to look at Shin Lian, if you can't sleep, don't drink coffee. Got it. Shin Lian watched him leave. She held a medicine bottle in her hand, which was hidden in her sleeve. She stood quietly and listened to Shin Zhongshan enter the bedroom. She knew that he would take the anti-hypertensive medicine before going to bed. His forehead was full of cold sweat and so were his palms. Shin Lian quickly walked in and Shin Zhongshan was holding the medicine bottle and took out 2 pills. Father. Shin Lian hurriedly called out. Shin Zhongshan lowered his head and looked at her, what's the matter? Shin Lian looked at the medicine in his hand and her face was as white as snow as she bit her lips tightly, her back was sweating profusely and her pajamas were wet. She just looked at him like that and her gaze was somewhat stiff. Shin Zhongshan did not say anything more as he ate the medicine in his hand and drank a mouthful of water before lightly saying, sleep early. Shin Lian still looked straight at him and after a long time, she softly said, Father, good night. Shin Zhongshan smiled. The door closed. Shin Lian looked at Shin Zhongshan's silhouette and slowly closed the door. She stood at the door, her body trembling. She laughed, and her laughter was a little desolate. Back in her room, Shin Lian found a cigarette and lit it with trembling hands. She needed to calm down. She couldn't sleep. The moment she closed her eyes, the image of Shin Zhongshan swallowing the pill appeared in front of her. From then on, he would take that medicine every day. She fed the poison with her own hands. In less than half a month, his nerves would be eroded. Perhaps, he would become a vegetable or suffer from dementia, who knows? Shin Lian cried and trembled as she smoked the cigarette in her hand. She didn't want to do this, but he had done a bone marrow match with her mother behind her back. Was he going to donate his bone marrow to Tang Xian? Was he going to give the company to Pei Chi? Shin Zhongshan started to feel unwell after a week. At that time, he was having a meeting in Jintaihe. Suddenly, he held his forehead with his hand and looked like he was in pain. Shin Lian stepped forward and asked with concern, Dad, are you all right? I'm fine. Shin Zhongshan waved his hand and struggled to raise his head. Continue. However, the next second, his body fell straight down. With a loud thud, he fell to the ground together with the chair. Dad, Dad. Shin Lian rushed over and hugged Shin Zhongshan. She screamed, call the ambulance. In the midst of the chaos, Shin Zhongshan was sent to Xingyuan Hospital. It was Dr. Yuan, whom he had always trusted, who examined him. Half an hour later, Dr. Yuan walked out of the examination room with a complicated expression on his face. Mrs. Shen and Shin Lian stepped forward. Mrs. Shen asked anxiously, how is it? Chapter 669. Dr. Yuan said calmly, be prepared. His nervous system is badly damaged. It's a miracle that he can hold on for so long. And this time, he may never wake up. Mrs. Shen was stunned. She looked at the doctor blankly. Dr. Yuan continued, "We'll do further tests to find out the cause." Mrs. Shen's face was drained of all color. She had completely collapsed. How could Chongshan be like this? Chongshan was a strong man. How could something like this happen to him? She couldn't believe it. Mrs. Shen couldn't face reality. Shen Lian looked at Dr. Yuan and whispered, "Thank you, doctor." Dr. Yuan said seriously, "Should we call the police? I suspect that someone deliberately set Chongshan up." Mrs. Shen was still crying. Shen Lian pursed her lips and said, "It's better not to alert the enemy." Dr. Yuan thought about it and agreed. "Let's wait and see. Maybe a miracle will happen." However, he knew in his heart that it was almost impossible for Shen Zhongshan to recover. That medicinal effect was too strong, too strong. He glanced at Shen Lian's face. Shen Lian pursed her lips and said to Mrs. Shen, "Mom, you stay here. I'll go home and pack my daily necessities." Mrs. Shen wiped her tears and said, "Ask the servants to bring them here. The servants are not so considerate." "I'll go home," Shen Lian said calmly. Mrs. Shen didn't say anything more. Shen Lian nodded at Dr. Yuan and left leisurely. Dr. Yuan and Mrs. Shen stood there. He took out a cigarette from his pocket but didn't light it. He asked Mrs. Shen directly, "Did Chongshan have any conflicts with anyone recently? Or was there anything unusual recently?" "No. Chongshan is a man of propriety. He usually doesn't do things that push people to the brink. I can't think of anyone who would do that." Mrs. Shen covered her face and sighed. "I thought that Chongshan had changed his mind and I would have a good life. I didn't expect such a thing to happen." Dr. Yuan had always been on good terms with the Shen family. He didn't know how to comfort Mrs. Shen. After a few words, a nurse asked him to leave. Mrs. Shen stood alone for a while. At this moment, her mind was blank. Suddenly, she thought of something. Shen Mansion. Shen Lian ran to the master bedroom on the second floor, followed by a servant. "Miss, what's wrong? You can go down. There's nothing else." Shen Lian blocked the stairway and ordered. The servant looked at his miss uneasily. Miss didn't look right. After the servant left, Shen Lian turned around and entered Shen Zhongshan's study. She keyed in a few passwords and found the DNA certificate in the safe. She looked at it for a while and sneered. She lit a fire and burned the document. From now on, no one would know that her father was also Pei Qiqi and Tang Xian's father. Jin Taihe would not fall into the hands of others. After it was burnt to ashes, Shen Lian quietly looked at it for a while, and then changed Shen Zhongshan's medicine. She erased her fingerprints and put the real medicine back. As for the problematic medicine, she held it in her hand and wanted to flush it down the toilet in the bathroom. But when she turned around, she saw Mrs. Shen. Chapter 670. Shen Lian's lips trembled. Unable to speak, she could only clench the bottle in her hand. Mrs. Shen's eyes were filled with tears. She glared at her daughter and asked, "Shen Lian, what are you holding in your hand?" Shen Lian took a step back. Her body was pressed against the wall behind her. She had nowhere to go and said in a trembling voice, "Mom, it's nothing. Why did you come back?" "Yes, if I hadn't come back, I would never have known that your father and I had raised an ingrate." Mrs. Shen was like a ferocious mother beast with claws all over her body. Shen Lian's facial muscles were trembling. Suddenly, she screamed, "Mom, what are you saying?" Mrs. Shen took a step forward. Her fingers were like pliers, grabbing Shen Lian's hand and raising it high. She raised the bottle high. Do you dare to say that there's nothing in it? Mrs. Shen dragged her all the way to the bedside where Shen Chongshan was sleeping. She picked up the bottle and said, Shen Lian, if you didn't do it, who did it? Ha! The last sound was like the roar of a mother beast that had lost its love. Shen Lian stared blankly at the two medicine bottles rolling down again and again. Tears fell like raindrops. Her voice was choked with sobs. Yes, I did it. Just as she finished speaking, she received a slap on her face. Then another slap. Mrs. Shen was usually gentle and weak. But at this moment, her palms were like iron plates. She slapped Shen Lian's face again and again. Shen Lian did not resist. She let Mrs. Shen hit her until her face was swollen. Mrs. Shen cried hoarsely as she hit her, What's wrong with you? He's your father. You hurt him like this. Aren't you afraid that God will punish you? Shen Lian let her hit her. Mrs. Shen was on the verge of breaking down. Her child had harmed her husband. The sky of her world was about to collapse. She hit her and howled. Tears streamed down her face. Shen Lian finally raised her eyes and looked at her mother, who was almost crazy. Mom, are you going to allow his betrayal? Mrs. Shen was stunned. She stopped and looked at her daughter in a daze. She said in a daze, So, just because of this, you want to harm him? Mom, wake up. Shen Lian was in a sorry state. She looked at her mother and said, Do you think he just slept with Zhao Ku? Mrs. Shen slapped him again. Do you know what you're saying? Shen Lian's face was slapped to the side. She covered her face and chuckled softly. She then raised her eyes and looked at Mrs. Shen with a pitiful gaze. Mom, are you really satisfied with this kind of marriage? Do you know how many things he's kept from you? Mrs. Shen's lips were trembling, and she couldn't say a word. Shen Lian sneered, You probably don't know this, but Pei Chi and Tang Xan are his and Zhao Ku's illegitimate children. Mrs. Shen was stunned. Pei Mingyi and Tang Ziyuan are both happy to be fathers. They were so stupid to raise a daughter for Shen Zhongshan. Mom, now he wants to acknowledge these two illegitimate children. Maybe he will even hand the company over to Pei Chi. Shen Lian laughed so hard that she was about to cry. Mom, think about it. If Pei Chi inherits the company, where will we stand? Where will you, Mrs. Shen, stand? Mrs. Shen's eyes were filled with disbelief. Chapter 671. Mrs. Shen's whole body was trembling, and so were her lips. She could not say a word. God, she had given birth to a good daughter. She had done something wrong, but she still acted as if it was a matter of course. She covered her face and screamed, Get out. I don't have a daughter like you. Get out. Shen Lian squatted down slowly and picked up the bottle. She looked at Mrs. Shen and smiled sadly. Mom, you'll figure it out. You'll know that everything I did today was right. Get out. Mrs. Shen's voice was hoarse. She raised her head and did not look at Shen Lian. Shen Lian paused for a while before she finally walked out. The door closed. She stood at the door and heard the heart-wrenching screams coming from inside. Mrs. Shen was screaming, Chongshan. Chongshan. But that man could never make it up to her. She did not believe that Chongshan would be so cruel to her and her son that he would leave everything for Zhao Ku's child. However, she gave birth to Shen Lian. Shen Lian was a piece of flesh that fell from her heart. No matter how bad Shen Lian was, she was still her daughter. She could not personally send her to jail. Mrs. Shen's hoarse cries came from the bedroom. Her voice was heartbreaking. Shen Lian flushed the pills down the toilet. She watched as the water washed away the pills. No one would ever know what she had done. She looked at her swollen face in the mirror. She did not blame her mother. She knew how much her mother loved Shen Zhongshan. In the end, it was the servants who sent the clothes to the hospital. Shen Lian's face was swollen, and Mrs. Shen was so emotional that she fainted. They got a doctor to give her an 4 drip. When Mrs. Shen woke up, she did not look at Shen Lian or talk to her. After that, they were like strangers living in the same house. Mrs. Shen did not look at her again. She was reminded of her sins when she saw her. A week later, because of Shen Zhongshan's health, Shen Lian temporarily took over the position of CEO of Jin Taihe. Of course, after he took office, he eliminated the dissidents. His actions were very big, and he also made some achievements. In a short period of time, he became a hot topic in B City. However, Mrs. Shen still did not speak to her. She was in the hospital during the day, and when she came back at night, she did not say a word or look at her. "Mom, how is Dad today?" Shen Lian held on to the armrest and asked carefully. Mrs. Shen was just about to head upstairs with her purse in her hand. She didn't turn around when she heard Shen Jining's words. Instead, she replied indifferently, "What do you think? Shouldn't you know best, CEO Shen?" At that moment, Shen Lian's heart and body were ice cold. It seemed that she had gained everything, but she had actually lost everything. Her father, Tang Yu, Qin Anlin, and even her mother did not help her. What did she do wrong? She just wanted to take back what belonged to her. Shen Zhongshan had betrayed his family, and this was what he deserved. She had given him a chance, but he had insisted on matching Tang Axin. Don't blame her. At Xingyuan Hospital, Tang Axin stayed in the hospital for more than 10 days before she was discharged. One night, she went out to look at the stars. Although Meng Qingqing accompanied her and put on extra clothes for her, she still caught a cold. The day before she was discharged, Pei Chichi happened to have a prenatal checkup and came to accompany Tang Axin. At that time, Meng Qingqing was in the small kitchen, squeezing a glass of apple juice for Tang Axin. Chapter 672. Pei Chichi sat there and glanced at Meng Qingqing's back view. She patted Tang Xin's little head and said in a low voice, "Qingqing treats you well. You've been taking care of you in the hospital for more than 10 days, and you're not annoyed at all." Tang Xin, who was wearing a hospital gown, also glanced over and snorted. "Even if he doesn't find it annoying, I find it annoying." But when she said this, she always had the softness of a little girl. Pei Chichi just smiled. At this moment, Meng Qingqing walked out and heard what Tang Xin said. He sighed. "If you say that, I'll be sad." Tang Xin took the glass of fruit juice from his hand and stuck out her tongue. "You won't. You have an indestructible body." Meng Qingqing didn't reply and just looked at her deeply. He was indeed not bad to others, but Tang Xin was the softest part of his heart. He wasn't so firm towards her from the start, and he couldn't do without her. After seeing so many people, his heart felt empty. He always felt that having a little girl was the best. But he didn't know if she knew how he felt. Tang Xin knew. Otherwise, why would she be willing to be taken care of by him for more than 10 days? Why would she be willing to lean on his shoulder and look at the stars? It wasn't that she liked him now, but she didn't want him to be sad. Brother Qingqing liked her. She thought that she might not live for so long, so she should let him be happy. They each had their own thoughts, but they didn't say it out loud because she was too young. Pei Chichi watched from the side. Slowly, she felt that she was a little unnecessary, and Tang Yu was talking to Director Hao. After she left, she wanted to walk around when she saw Tang Yu walking over. He didn't look well. Pei Chi walked over slowly and hugged his arm. What's wrong? Tang Yu lowered his head, his voice a little hoarse. Uncle Shin isn't doing well. He was admitted to the hospital last time, and now it's basically confirmed that he has dementia in advance. Pei Chi was stunned. How could that be? She had seen Shin Zhongshan a few days ago, and he looked fine. How did he get that kind of illness? Tang Yu didn't say anything more, but his mood was a little heavy. No matter how unpleasant the past was between him and Shin Lian, Shin Zhongshan was still an elder that he respected. His circumstances made him sigh. He patted Pei Chi's hand. Let's go take a look. Pei Chi nodded and walked with him to the inpatient department on the second floor. There was no one else in Shin Zhongshan's ward except for the two nurses and himself. Sitting on the bed without any expression, there was a small plate in his hand with cut fruits on it. Shin Zhongshan was putting the fruits into his mouth piece by piece. The nurse wiped his mouth from time to time. This was the Shin Zhongshan that Tang Yu had never seen before. He couldn't help but sigh. Shin Zhongshan quickly finished the food on the plate and looked straight at the nurse. Big sister, I want more. The nurse lowered her head and said something, and Shin Zhongshan laughed. Pei Chi almost couldn't bear to watch anymore. She couldn't believe that this was Shin Zhongshan, the dignified Shin Zhongshan. Tang Yu didn't go up to greet him. After they walked out of the door, Pei Chi asked him. He held her little hand and walked forward slowly. After a long time, he said softly, I just don't want to disturb his world. Chapter 673. Pei Chi hugged his arm and stroked her belly with one hand. What about Mrs. Shin? Why isn't she around? Tang Yu patted her and said, I heard from Dr. Yuan that Mrs. Shin's body suddenly collapsed. She has been on an 4-drip at home these days and can't even walk. Pei Chi stood still and looked up at Tang Yu. Her eyes were watery. Chi, I won't do this. Tang Yu held her hand tightly and pulled her into his arms. He said softly, I will always take good care of our child. She buried her face in his arms and breathed in his warm breath. After a while, she said in a muffled voice, Tang Yu, I actually feel sad when I look at him. He was obviously an unrelated person and he was Shin Lian's father. But looking at his face and hearing him say naive words that didn't match his status, Pei Chi's heart twitched violently. It was a strange feeling that she couldn't explain. Tang Yu reached out and patted her. He murmured softly, it's probably because she's pregnant. She gets emotional easily. He was starting to regret bringing her along. Pei Chi walked to the elevator and couldn't help but turn back. When she turned back, Shin Zhongshan's nurse happened to push him out to bask in the sun. Shin Zhongshan was sitting in a wheelchair and in front of him was a little scarf that a child used to eat. Pei Chi's eyes felt a little warm as she looked at it. Her heart was hit hard again, and her lower abdomen was twitching violently. She held her lower abdomen with her fingers and had a strange expression on her face. Chi. Tang Yu hugged her. What's wrong? Pei Chi looked up at him and the corners of her lips moved. After a while, she said softly, Tang Yu, it seems that the baby is moving. She held his warm palm and placed it on her lower abdomen, letting him feel the magic. Tang Yu only felt that there was a slight movement in his palm. That power was as gentle as water, his eyes were a little moist and his expression was emotional. He gently embraced Pei Chi. Thank you, Chi. She buried her head in his shoulder and saw Shin Zhongshan walking past them. Shin Zhongshan had a childish smile on his face. Pei Chi leaned on Tang Yu's shoulder. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she said in a nasal voice, Tang Yu, I feel so sorry for him. Tang Yu patted her. Don't think too much. It will only make you sad. Shen Zhongshan passed by. Suddenly, he turned his head and smiled at Pei Chi-Chi. Mississippi, Pei Chi-Chi was startled. After a while, she returned a smile. For some reason, Shen Zhongshan refused to move forward. His fingers were stuck on the wheelchair, preventing it from being pushed. The nurse turned around and smiled. Mr. Shen likes Mrs. Tang very much. Pei Chi-Chi broke free from Tang Yu and walked gently to Shen Zhongshan. He looked up at her and shook his head gently. He looked no different from a 4 or 5-year-old child. Pei Chi-Chi slowly squatted down and held Shen Zhongshan's hand. She touched his little finger. You have to listen to me. Shen Zhongshan smiled and repeated the words. Pei Chi-Chi's eyes were a little wet. She smiled and said, I'll come to see you next time, okay? Shen Zhongshan stared at her, as if he was trying to remember her in his mind. Before leaving, Pei Chi-Chi looked at Tang Yu and said in a low voice, I'm really sad that such a person became a child. Chapter 674. As the car slowly started, Pei Chi-Chi couldn't help but look at the building again. Tang Yu thought that she was worried about Tang Axayan, so he patted her head and said, she will be discharged tomorrow. Don't worry. Pei Chi-Chi looked at the blazing sun in front of him, shining with golden light. She pursed her lips and didn't tell Tang Yu that she was sad to see Shen Zhongshan like that. She was afraid that if she told him, he would say that she was sentimental because she was pregnant. In the quiet car, she leaned on his shoulder. Peace, peace. After the summit of B City's high-end enterprises, Tang Yu was about to get into the car when he heard a female voice behind him. He turned around and saw Shen Lian. She was wearing Issey Miyake's white suit, elegant as an orchid, and walked quickly to Tang Yu. Mr. Shen, what's the matter? Tang Yu was about to open the car door and had to deal with it. He looked around and saw that many of the business elites he knew had left. Perhaps they were idle, but they would also look over to gossip. Shen Lian looked up at him. Tang Yu had been married for almost 2 months. Time did not leave any mark on him, but he looked more mature and exuded a noble aura, which was like a poison that attracted women. Tang Yu, let's have dinner together. Shen Lian said humbly. I have something to discuss with you about my father's condition. Tang Yu looked at her for a long time and said in a low voice, if you have any questions about Uncle Shen, you can ask Director Hao or Dr. Yuan. Dr. Yuan is Uncle Shen's best friend, and I think he will do his best. Then, he nodded slightly and said, I still have something to do, so we can skip the dinner. He opened the car door and got into the car, buckled the seatbelt, and the car window slowly rolled up. Shen Lian watched his car drive away without any reluctance, and her fingers clenched. She had just helped Jean Taihe win a few big projects and was in the limelight. She thought that Tang Yu would at least look at her. She was much stronger than Pei Chi-Chi, a woman who only knew how to use despicable means. Other than scheming, what else could Pei Chi-Chi do? However, Tang Yu didn't even look at her and left just like that. Shen Lian stood there in a daze, feeling the malice of the whole world. Why? Why didn't he look at her again? Why did Pei Chi-Chi hold his gaze so firmly? Why? Frustrated, Shen Lian began to loiter in bars again. During the day, she was the high and mighty President Shen of a multinational company. At night, she was the queen of the bar. She led a befuddled life because no one cared about her anymore. Shen Zhongshan was a fool. Even if he wasn't a fool, he probably didn't care about her. Instead, he wanted to tear this unfilial daughter of his apart. Her mother ignored her, didn't talk to her, didn't look at her, and didn't even eat with her. She had nothing left. Wearing a black see-through dress, Shen Lian leaned against the seat of the bar and looked at the men in front of her. Her eyes were hazy from drunkenness. Tonight, I will belong to whoever drinks the most, she smiled charmingly, but her eyes were empty. She felt that she was actually a walking corpse. The men in front of her were all trying to please her. Other than her body, there was also her money. After the matter, she would give these men a tip, because she was the queen, and these cheap men were out to sell themselves. Chapter 675. This was the scene that Qin Anlin saw when he walked into the bar. Shen Lian was kissing a man, and the people around them were clapping and cheering. After the man finished kissing, he immediately drank a large glass of brandy, and the last sip was shared with Shen Lian. The golden liquor slowly flowed down her chin, down her neck, and even her collar. The man put Shen Lian's entire body on the table, held her hand, and licked the liquor clean from top to bottom. Qin Anlin watched quietly. After a while, he took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and took a puff. He was still looking at Shen Lian. Until she discovered his existence. Shen Lian's pupils shrank. She stared at Qin Anlin, and then she quickly pushed the man away. "Did you have fun?" Qin Anlin smiled faintly as he looked at Shen Lian. In his eyes, she was no longer a high and mighty queen, but a prostitute of the lowest status. Shen Lian stood up and reached out to brush her long wavy hair. Her voice was a little cold. "What are you doing here? Are you here to laugh at me?" Qin Anlin sneered. "President Shen is riding the crest of success now. How can you laugh at me?" As he said that, he walked over. President Qin had his own aura. The men who were trying to seduce him naturally knew that he was a big shot, so they took the initiative to retreat. There were only the two of them here. The most ironic thing was that this corner was only a few meters away from the place where they had made love the last time. That night, when Shen Lian cried and told him, "Qin Anlin, let's be together," he really hesitated. Qin Anlin flicked the ash off his cigarette and smiled. Fortunately, he didn't take it seriously that night. Shen Lian also sat down, brushed her hair, and said indifferently, "Why are you free tonight?" Or. Her voice was a little hoarse. "Or do you have time to accompany me?" Qin Anlin held a cigarette and looked deeply into her eyes. After a while, he chuckled, "I'm not one of your little wolf dogs." His body leaned forward slightly and he seemed a little devilish. "Shen Lian, I'm not used to driving public transport." Although he didn't have a virgin complex, he wasn't interested in such a messy woman. She slept next to one man tonight and slept in another man's bed tomorrow. As soon as he said that, Shen Lian raised her hand angrily, wanting to slap him. She raised her hand, but Qin Anlin reached out and grabbed it. His grip was so strong that it hurt her. "Shen Lian, go ahead and ruin yourself. Look at yourself when you're free. Do you think Tang Yu will still want you like this?" Qin Anlin let go of her hand, got up, and patted the wrinkles on his body. "Let me give you a piece of advice. Men and women are different. It doesn't matter how many women a man has experienced before marriage. It's different for a woman. If you're sure you want to continue like this, no one can control you. But think about your name. See if you're worthy." Shen Lian was stunned. Qin Anlin had already left. She thought he would leave, that he had appeared tonight for her. But she was wrong again. Qin Anlin walked to the other side and was quickly surrounded by a beauty. He didn't reject her. He kissed her passionately, caressed her, and then left. Shen Lian took a photo and the next day it was published in the newspapers. The headline was, "King Entertainment CEO Meets a Beauty at Night." Chapter 676. When she returned home late at night, she was wearing a pair of 7-inch high heels. She did not drive, nor did she hail a cab. Instead, she squatted by the roadside and threw up. A boorish man who passed by the roadside whistled at her. Shen Lian stood in the night breeze. Are you crazy? She had just finished scolding when the man's eyes shone with a green light, filled with greed and lust. The man was dressed crudely. His face was covered with a beard and his hair was long and curly. He looked dirty. His eyes scanned Shen Lian's body from head to toe like a radar. The green light became even more intense. Especially this woman's fair and tender skin, it suited his taste very well. She was so drunk, and she was at the entrance of a bar. It would be a waste if he did not do it. The uncouth man ran forward, grabbed her, and dragged her into the alley, muttering dirty words as he desperately and hurriedly rubbed her. Let go of me, you crazy man. Shen Lian was hugged from behind, and that person was kissing her neck. She could even smell a stinky breath. That person's hands were extremely rough, and the smell on his body was also very unpleasant. She punched and kicked him. One of her shoes fell off, and her delicate feet were scraped on the ground. She cried and screamed, but nothing could stop the man. Late at night in B City, especially in such an area, there was no one around. Shen Lian's body was pressed against the wall. The rough wall scraped her back, and it was burning hot. But no matter how painful it was not as painful as the humiliation. The boorish man said dirty words as he took advantage of her. That black and white, that foul smell, became Shen Lian's nightmare for the rest of her life. Her forehead was covered in sweat. That stinky mouth, a mouth full of yellow teeth, and those green eyes were in front of her. At the last moment, Shen Lian's body slipped and she sat on the ground. The man in front of her did not seem to be willing to let it end just like that. He had never touched a woman who was as soft as tofu, and it was free. However, the homeless man in his 50s had the will but not the strength. He tried to struggle again, but to no avail. After cursing for a while, he bent down to pick up Shen Lian's purse, took out all the cash from the wallet inside, and lowered his head to rub his foot against Shen Lian's body. Shen Lian vomited and shouted weakly, I'm going to kill you. The man grinned, revealing his yellow teeth. I'm not afraid. Women like you are the most prideful. Why don't you sue me? It just so happens that I don't have a house to live in, so I can live here for free. But when I come out, I'll make you feel good. This kind of woman was the best at pretending to be serious. He was clearly feeling good just now, but he pretended that he didn't feel anything. Bitch. The man took the money and left quickly, leaving Shen Lian there, unable to get up for a long time. She was there, torn apart. That was because the man came straight at her without giving her any time to react. But even though it was so painful, she still reached her limit in the end. This was the most shameful thing in Shen Lian's life. It was a pain that she was unable to speak of. She swore that she must find that man and dismember his body into 10,000 pieces. When she returned to the Shen mansion, it was already late at night. Unexpectedly, Shen Furen was not asleep. Under the light, Shen Furen's face was somewhat stiff. She looked at Shen Lian and that torn clothes, which was neither human nor ghost. Shen Furen frowned and did not say anything. Chapter 677. Shen Lian screamed at Mrs. Shen, Mom, why don't you care about me? Aren't you going to ask me what happened? Mrs. Shen didn't say anything. She just sat there. She looked at the TV, which was showing a palace drama, The Inheritance War. She murmured to herself, how cruel. She even killed her own father and brother. She didn't seem to feel anything. She just looked at the TV and murmured to herself. Shen Lian's entire body was cold. She slowly walked over. The skin on her feet was already broken, and every step was painful. She turned off the TV. There was no sound at all. After that, there was dead silence. Shen Lian stood between the television and Mrs. Shen. Her entire face was covered in sweat and dirt. Her voice was dry and hoarse. "Mom, I've been raped." Mrs. Shen was still sitting there. She didn't show much reaction on her face. After a long time, she raised her eyes and looked at Shen Lian blankly. "Your father should take his medicine. I'll go get it for him. I can't take the wrong medicine again." Mrs. Shen said to herself as she walked, "You can't take the wrong medicine again. Chongshan, I will watch you carefully. This time, you won't take the wrong medicine." She kept talking and walked upstairs slowly. She didn't look at Shen Lian at all. Later, Shen Lian found out that Mrs. Shen was in a trance. She was not normal. She was sometimes good and sometimes bad. At this time, Shen Lian watched Mrs. Shen go upstairs. Her whole body was trembling. She had been raped, but her mother didn't seem to hear it. In her heart, there was only Shen Chongshan. Shen Chongshan. No one cared about her. Shen Lian's hands were trembling. She took out the medicine from her bag. It was the morning after medicine. She swallowed it raw. She drank water, and swallowed it with tears. Half a month later, the homeless man was found. Shen Lian ordered someone to kill him. In the end, his legs were broken. But the man was very tough. He ran away and was never found again. Until later, but that man left a deep scar in Shen Lian's heart and body. That mouthful of yellow teeth and the rancid odor emanating from his body couldn't be dispersed. When she slowly calmed down, she ran into Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi in the hospital. Pei Chi-Chi's belly could already be seen. The weather was hot in August, and Pei Chi-Chi was wearing a loose white dress. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail. Other than her belly, her arms and legs were slim, and she looked very girlish. Tang Yu held her hand. From behind, one couldn't tell that Pei Chi-Chi was pregnant at all. It was like holding a little girl's hand. Just by looking at her, Shen Lian could see how much Tang Yu doted on that woman. That love was supposed to be hers. Her eyes seemed to be on fire as she looked at him. After a long time, she walked into Shen Zhongshan's ward. Shen Zhongshan was eating. He was like a child now. He loved to eat. He wanted to eat all day long. If the nurse hadn't stopped him, he would have been fat. Shen Lian went in and closed the door. She looked at him quietly for a while. The nurse coaxed Shen Zhongshan to eat an apple. When she saw Shen Lian, she smiled. "Miss Shen, you're here." Shen Lian hadn't visited Shen Zhongshan for a long time. Because of her guilty conscience, fear, and avoidance. She nodded and said softly to the nurse, "You can leave. I want to accompany Dad." The nurse hesitated for a while but still left. Chapter 678. Shen Zhongshan's gaze landed on her face and he only said one word, "Eat." Shen Lian looked at him and placed the fruits that the nurse had placed in front of Shen Zhongshan. "Eat." Shen Zhongshan did not move. He only raised his head and looked at Shen Lian with a hint of helplessness in his eyes. This was Shen Zhongshan, the Shen Zhongshan who used to be so famous in B City. Who didn't know him? But now, it had become like this. Shen Lian sneered, "Why aren't you eating?" She moved her face closer to him and said in a cold voice, "Dad, are you afraid that I'll hurt you?" Shen Zhongshan's body moved backward and he lowered his head. After a long time, he said, "No." He lowered his head so that Shen Lian could not see his expression. She only felt angry. She grabbed his head with one hand and held his face. She stuffed the fruits into Shen Zhongshan's mouth with all her might. "Don't you want to eat? Then eat as much as you want." Shan moved a few times and stopped moving. Then, he began to eat the fruits in her hands. As he chewed, the juice flowed out of his mouth. He looked extremely pathetic. The Shan in the past would never be like this. You really have dementia. Shen Lian stopped and looked at her father coldly. Do you know why? Because you're not a good father. Shen Lian's eyes were watery. You've already let Zhao Ku and Pei Chi and Tang Xan down. Why do you have to let me and Mom down as well? As she spoke, she walked around the bed and looked at the man who only cared about eating. Pei Chi married Tang Yu and you started to match Tang Xan's type. Did your heart soften? Do you feel guilty for what you did to your two daughters? Shen Lian's smile was strange. Dad, I'm so afraid. I'm afraid that you'll soften and give Jin Taihe to someone else. That would be worse than death for me. I've given in to Tang Yu and Dad. Do I still have to give in to the company? Shen Lian bent down and placed a mango on top of Shen Zhongshan's head. Immediately, a yellow juice flowed down his head, covering his entire face. So, I can't let you have a good time, Dad. Isn't it good like this? Our family of 3 will always be together, and there won't be any lowly daughter coming to destroy us. Shen Lian stared into his eyes and smiled sinisterly. Shen Zhongshan's mouth was wide open, and he couldn't say anything for a long time. He dipped his finger into the mango juice and put it in his mouth. He ate it carefully and savored it. His face was as happy as a child's. Delicious. Even Shen Lian was stunned. Right now, Shen Zhongshan was just a child. She looked at his face and sneered, Dad, if you can't recover after 5 years, I will inherit your shares and take back Tang Yu. Just you wait and see. Who is better, Pei Chi or me, Shen Lian? As she said that, the door of the ward opened. Shen Lian turned around and saw Mrs. Shen standing at the door, looking at them coldly. Shen Lian's lips moved. Mom. Mrs. Shen walked in and still didn't look at her. She only scolded in a low voice, bastard. Then, she carefully cleaned the mango on Shen Zhongshan's head and coaxed him in a low voice, Zhongshan, let's go take a shower, okay? Shen Zhongshan obviously didn't want to. Mrs. Shen coaxed him in a low voice, I brought a duckling over today. It can squawk. She took out a duckling from her bag and pressed it, making a squawking sound. Shen Zhongshan clapped his hands and immediately said that he wanted to take a bath. Mrs. Shen pushed him to the bathroom and didn't look at the bastard again. That night, the servants moved Mrs. Shen's things away. When Shen Lian asked, she found out that they were moving to another property, which wasn't as big as this one. Chapter 679. Ever since the first fetal movement, Pei Chi-Chi's belly had been very active every day. That child was especially active. Every day, he liked to kick and punch the ground with his little fist. Moreover, Pei Chi-Chi had become very lazy and didn't like to move. She went to the company 3 times a week, and the rest of the time, Xiaowen would send her over and she would deal with it at home. Early in the morning, Tang Yu had already put on his tie. He bent down and kissed her cheek. His voice was a little hoarse. Mrs. Tang, do you want Mr. Tang to send you today? Pei Chi-Chi hugged the quilt. Her hair was messy, and she looked like a little crazy. Her voice was soft and coquettish. Tang Yu, I don't want to get up. She said that, which meant that she was going to the company today. But the little lazy worm didn't want to get up. Tang Yu chuckled, sat down, and reached out to touch her little head. Then don't go. Rest at home with the baby. He thought unkindly that it was good for Pei Enterprises to collapse. She didn't have to go to work. But he couldn't tell his Pei Chi-Chi about this. Otherwise, she would probably bite him to death. Well, pregnant women were very difficult to serve, in all aspects. For example, in that area. He didn't know if she was pregnant, but she was very clingy and always wanted him to hug her. He didn't dare to touch her. Hugging her to sleep was also a challenge for a hot-blooded man like Tang Yu. She was 4 months pregnant, and her lower abdomen was slightly protruding. In front, it looked like a little frog with 4 slender legs, but in the back, it was even more charming, especially below the waistline, which was much more voluptuous. This was the difference between hugging a girl and hugging a woman. Tang Yu, who had been abstinent for a long time, hugged her, pushed her messy hair aside, and kissed her. Then he said in a low voice, "I'll feed you tonight." In fact, she was uncomfortable, but he was even more uncomfortable. Pei Chi blushed and looked at him. I don't want that." He smiled and pinched her. "Get up, or I'll change for you." "Huh?" As he said that, he put his big hand into the quilt. Pei Chi screamed, and her little face was red. "No," she grabbed his fingers under the quilt and leaned into his arms like a rascal. She said softly, "I have something urgent to do later." Tang Yu was actually just teasing her, but now he wanted to do it for real. He couldn't even remember when was the last time he tasted meat. He exhaled with difficulty and said in a hoarse voice, "I'll let you go." However, he still kissed her all over before he let her go. Looking at her intoxicated expression, Mr. Tang was very satisfied. "Mrs. Tang, Mr. Tang has a great sense of achievement." Pei Chi bit him and didn't let go. Tang Yu allowed her to do as she pleased. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Chi, if you continue like this, I might not be able to take it anymore." She finally let go. She lay on his shoulder for a while, and her little hands hugged his neck. She was indescribably cute. At this time, Tang Yu was in the mood to raise a daughter, and all the messy thoughts from before were gone. Naughty little girl. Reaching out, he patted her butt and exhaled. He carried her to the bathroom and personally helped his little friend wash her face and brush her teeth. Chapter 680. Looking at the pregnant woman in the mirror, Mr. Tang was amused. "Pei Chi, don't you think you're spoiled?" "Fine," she admitted it. Mrs. Tang Jr. stuck to him and put the toothbrush in his hand. Tang Yu was speechless. She was really spoiled. However, he still took the toothbrush and brushed her teeth gently. He asked Pei Chi in a very gentle voice, "Baby, let me carry you to the bathroom. I'll wipe your teeth later." Pei Chi covered her eyes. "Tang Yu, you're a pervert." He put one hand on her belly and the other on her waist. Looking at the two of them in the mirror, he said slowly, "Mrs. Tang, if you weren't pregnant, you would know how perverted I am." Pei Chi opened her eyes and saw his clear black eyes in the mirror. Whenever he looked like this, it meant he was about to do something bad. She quickly covered her eyes again. Tang Yu teased her in a low voice, "Hurry up and get changed. I'll wait for you downstairs." He let go of her and Pei Chi glanced at him in the mirror. Tang Yu smiled and went downstairs. Breakfast was a pleasant one. Mr. Tang, who was dissatisfied, still served Mrs. Tang well. When they got in the car, she automatically sat in the back. Since she was pregnant, Tang Yu didn't let her sit in the front. Tang Yu drove and occasionally talked to Pei Chi. Pei Chi was a little bored and read the newspaper in the car. She liked to read entertainment news. She saw the news about Pei Huan in the headlines. It was hard for her. She was not even a 4th or 5th A-lister, but she was in the headlines. Of course, it was also because of his flirtatious relationship with a certain rich second-generation heir that he was able to rise to the top. Pei Chi also found out that Pei Huan had been doing well recently. Although he couldn't be compared to before, he could be considered to be standing in the entertainment industry again. How much effort did she put in and how many men she slept with, Pei Chi did not know. Was this the life that Pei Huan wanted? She used to think that Pei Huan loved Jinrong and would find a way to save Jinrong after he woke up, but she didn't. Pei Huan was still the same, perhaps, even she herself had given up on herself. What are you looking at? You haven't spoken for a long time, Tang Yu asked in a low voice as he looked at his little friend in the rearview mirror. Pei Chi closed the newspaper and said softly, "It's Pei Huan. She seems to be with a rich second generation recently." Tang Yu seemed to know what she was thinking, and it happened to be a red light. He rubbed his chin with his fingers and said faintly, "Jinrong can't be with her. They don't have any feelings, and they don't have a child. Besides, Pei Huan has been with so many men. Jinrong is not a fool." "I know." Pei Chi looked down. Tang Yu did not say anything else. When the car stopped at the Pei Corporation's building, he opened the door for her and reached out to rub her hair. "You think too much, little friend. Pei Huan is not a child anymore. She has to be responsible for the path she has chosen. Pei Huan had a chance. She had already stepped into a rich family and was even pregnant. Even if Jinrong became a vegetable at that time, as long as she was willing to give birth to the child, the Lin family would not mistreat her. After all, that was the only root of the Lin family. Moreover, after giving birth, it wasn't like she couldn't remarry. It wasn't the past anymore. Chapter 681. Pei Chi nodded and looked up, "Then pick me up in the afternoon. Come at noon. I have something to do nearby." He pinched her little face again. "My little cow must be obedient." Pei Chi's face turned red. When did she become a little cow again? But she soon remembered that Tang Yu held her hand last night and said slowly, "Pei Chi, you seem to have grown up." She stared at him shamelessly. Tang Yu smiled and was about to get into the car when he saw something flashing in the corner of his eyes. "Pei Chi, you bitch, you made our Pei Huan so miserable. I'm going to destroy you." A very childish female voice was heard, and then, before Pei Chi could react, she was swept into a warm embrace, and then she heard a painful moan. She opened her eyes and saw a girl in her early 20s lying on the ground. Half of her arm was charred, and there was a pungent smell. It was Lucia. Pei Chi was stunned. At this time, several security guards ran over and pressed the girl on the ground. Of course, they also took away the remaining half of the bottle on the ground. The girl covered her face and screamed. She looked very pitiful on the ground. "Call the police and send her to the hospital." Pei Chi was slightly trembling in Tang Yu's arms. She saw that the girl's face was also charred. She was probably disfigured. Tang Yu gestured for the security guards to do it, and he helped Pei Chi in. But after 2 steps, Pei Chi stopped. Her face was a little pale, and her lips were completely devoid of blood. Tang Yu said in a low voice, "Chi." Pei Chi's forehead was full of sweat, and her little hand grabbed Tang Yu tightly. "Tang Yu, send me to the hospital." The child, she lowered her head and looked below her. She was wearing a white dress, and there was a bright red stain on it. It was dyed red and stung her eyes. She was in so much pain that her nails dug deep into Tang Yu's flesh. Her pale lips pursed again and again as she endured the pain. "Tang Yu. Tang Yu, I can't lose this child." This child was not only Tang Xian's hope, it was also the child she had been waiting for. It was the fruit of her and Tang Yu's labor. In just over 5 months, they would be parents. She was terrified that she might not be able to keep the baby. "Chi, don't speak." Tang Yu's eyes were a little red. He had already picked her up and carefully placed her on the back seat. At this time, Xiaowen also rushed over and sat in the car. "Don't worry, Mr. Tang. I'll take care of him from behind." Tang Yu nodded and immediately jumped into the car. He took Pei Chi-Chi to the nearest hospital as fast as he could. His mind was in a mess, but he forced himself to calm down. Just as Chi-Chi said, nothing could happen to this child. Slowly, he calmed down and said in a low voice, "Chi-Chi, nothing will happen to the child. I promise you." Pei Chi-Chi's forehead was still covered in cold sweat. She felt waves of pain in her lower abdomen. It was very painful, but when she heard Tang Yu's voice, she slowly calmed down. If he said nothing would happen, she would believe that the child would be safe. Tang Yu. She called his name. At this time, she only felt at ease when he was by her side. Xiaowen hugged her, feeling anxious. However, she did not dare to show it, for fear that President Pei would overthink. Chapter 682. In the end, they still went to Xinyuan Hospital. In the car, Tang Yu threw his phone to Xiao Wen and asked her to contact him. Xiao Wen's voice trembled as she spoke. Soon, doctors and emergency treatment were arranged. When they arrived at the hospital, Tang Yu carried Pei Chi-Chi to the emergency room. She was lying on the white hospital bed with a pale face. Tang Yu's body was also stained with her blood. He bent down and placed his hands on both sides of her head. His face was close to hers, and his lips were near her ears. "Chi-Chi, the child will be fine. Bear with it." His heart ached for her, but he knew that nothing could happen to the child. His Chi-Chi was strong, but he couldn't imagine what would happen to the child without her. Pei Chi-Chi closed her eyes. She had already lost her strength and voice from the pain. She just slowly moved her fingers and held Tang Yu's hand tightly. Then, she let go. Dr. Mei rushed over and helped push the door in. She glanced at Tang Yu and said, "Wait outside. Nothing will happen." She saw that Tang Yu's eyes were red. This child had never been so fragile before. "Auntie Mei, please." Tang Yu's eyes were a little hot as he raised his head. "Chi-Chi is very important to me." Auntie Mei understood the meaning behind his words. No matter what, this child was not as important as Pei Chi-Chi. She nodded and said, "I understand." The door of the operating room closed. The sound of the door closing seemed to hit Tang Yu's heart, and he couldn't calm down for a long time. He stood outside the door, feeling uneasy. This kind of anxiety and fear was something he had never felt before. His life had been smooth sailing, and he was sure of almost everything. He had never made a mistake. Even when Pei Chi-Chi ran away from the marriage, he had been careful with every step and finally tied her to his arms. However, at this moment, he couldn't help her. He could only wait outside and watch his Chi-Chi suffer. He said that the child could be saved, but he couldn't guarantee it. He just wanted her to be more confident and stronger. His Chi-Chi had always been strong. Tang Yu held his forehead with his fingers and looked up. His eyes were warm. Lin Yun, Zhao Yi, Grandpa Shin, and even Tang Ziyuan were here. "What's going on?" Lin Yun walked over quickly and asked. Tang Yu wiped his face with his palm. "Maybe Pei Huan's fans did it. But I'm not sure, we still need to investigate." Lin Yun paused, then said angrily, "This Pei Huan really doesn't know when to stop. Hasn't Chi-Chi suffered a lot from her? What's the point of harming yourself and others like this?" Old Master Lin was also quite furious. He knocked on his walking stick. If it was really Pei Huan who attracted it, he would chop Pei Huan into pieces. Tang Yu's heart was a little confused, but he still talked about the matter and kept a clear mind. "This can't be concluded so quickly. I don't think it's that simple. If she was really a fan, shouldn't she protect her idol? Why would she bring trouble on herself? However, Tang Yu couldn't care so much now. The most important thing was the safety of Chi-Chi and the child. As for the person behind the scenes, he had to find out. He couldn't let a time bomb stay by Chi-Chi's side. Lin Yun nodded. We'll see when Chi-Chi and her child are safe. She was a Buddhist. At this moment, she closed her eyes and sincerely prayed to Buddha for Pei Chi-Chi. Zhao Yi helped her sit to the side, and his careful look made Tang Ziyuan look sideways. At this time, other people were worried about her, but he saw it clearly. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.